Okay, going live.
All right, YouTube should be going out momentarily. And I'm going to vacate the seat so Pamela can sit here and read you a story. Read us a story. So I will attempt to put myself on the floor.
Funk.
Maybe we did a bigger lens. Smaller lens. Maybe
Wider
did
angle.
something.
Isn't that the 18?
Yeah, this is the 18. Set to 18.
Welcome to the CosmoQuest slumber party.
All right.
Broken Symmetry asks, how are the comfy chairs working out? They're working out wonderfully. Yes.
Not a Triceratops.
He's a walrus.
Told him a walrus.
He is a walrus. It's very, very true. Very true. All right. So, tonight we're going to start reading The Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I have to admit, Allie knows more about this story than I do, so I'm going to let her give some background.
I haven't read that one. I've only read John Carter. I've read some of the John Carter stuff. I haven't read A Princess of Mars, though, so I was excited about this tonight because this is my first time. I love the John Carter stories and the ones that I've read so far.
What's the general gist of the John Carter story
It's
universe?
kind of a like fantasy, like proto sci-fi, written in like the early 20th
Yeah.
century. And it's about like all these just wild adventures of this human dude named John Carter on Mars, with just like interacting with the Martians and fighting monsters and stuff. There was, I think Disney made a movie.
It was terrible.
It's terrible, but it's like fun. It's one of those that's like fun to watch late at night with friends and an adult beverage, you know. So I don't know. I enjoyed it. It's not a good movie, though. If I ever say I enjoy a movie, that does not automatically like speak to its quality. But yeah, I just really like, I love like old pulpy sci-fi fantasy stuff. And one of my hobbies is like rifling through the sci-fi section at used bookstores for like old pulpy paperbacks, and I recently like picked up a bunch of like John Carter books that I'm working my way through.
That's awesome.
So I'm very excited to hear that.
So we clearly can't read the entirety of the novel during Hangout-a-Thon. I mean, that could be a completely different Hangout-a-Thon. But. Readathon. Yes. Just Sean, thank you for the warm comments. They bring me joy. Things like that really matter to us. Yeah, I should get a shotgun. I may have one, but yeah, that's not for tomorrow. So we have really good lapel mics, but they decided that the receiver is no longer going to be received. I'm going to debug that tonight after we're done, and that will give us a better experience. So,
Onward and upward.
yeah, I'm going to start with chapter 3. This was written to be serialized content, where they were releasing just a chapter at a time, and people eagerly waited for the next chapter back in the days before sitcoms and TV shows. Chapter 3 is where our cowboy, having fallen asleep in a cave, somehow realizes he's not quite where he started in Arizona. If you want to hear this story in its entirety, I'm going to be reading it on my personal channel, Starstrider, with a Y, because mistakes were made in my 20s.
Starstrider's a fine name.
It
Yes,
is,
it
but the
is.
Y, I have to
Listen,
say
it's better than what
forever.
some- I say this, and I've had my inane English name since I was like 19. So I'm just gonna stop now.
Look,
I
at
have
least you're
no
not
idea
like
why.
a 12-year-old with X's and bad numbers in your name.
It's true. So, yeah, Starstrider. I am going to read this over on my channel starting Tuesday. But But for now, here is your story time as we end out today's stream. This is Edgar Rice Burroughs, The Princess of Mars. Chapter 3, My Advent on Mars. I opened my eyes upon a strange and weird landscape. I knew that I was on Mars. Not once did I question either my sanity or my wakefulness. I was not asleep. No need for pinching here. My inner consciousness told me as plainly that I was upon Mars as your conscious mind tells you that you are upon Earth. You do not question the fact. Neither did I. I found myself lying prone upon a bed of yellowish, moss-like vegetation, which stretched around me in all directions for interminable miles. I seemed to be lying in a deep circular basin, along the outer verge of which I could distinguish the irregularities of low hills. It was midday. The sun was shining full upon me, and the heat of it was rather intense upon my naked body, yet no greater than would have been true under similar conditions on an Arizona desert. Here and there were slight outcroppings of quartz-bearing rocks which glistened in the sunlight. And a little to my left, perhaps 100 yards, appeared a low-walled enclosure about 4 feet in height. No water, and no other vegetation than the moss was in evidence. And as I was somewhat thirsty, I determined to do a little exploring. Springing to my feet, I received my first Martian surprise. For the effort, which on Earth would have brought me standing upright, carried me into the Martian air to the height of about 3 yards. I alighted softly upon the ground, however, without appreciable shock or jar. Now commenced a series of evolutions which even then seemed ludicrous in the extreme. I found that I must learn to walk all over again, as the muscular exertion which carried me easily and safely upon Earth played strange antics with me upon Mars. Instead of progressing in a sane and dignified manner, my attempts to walk resulted in a variety of hops which took me clear of the ground a couple of feet at each step and landed me sprawling upon my face or back at the end of each second or third hop. My muscles, perfectly attuned and accustomed to the force of gravity on Earth, played the mischief with me in attempting for the first time to cope with the lesser gravitation and lower air pressure of Mars. I was determined, however, to explore the low structure which was the only evidence of habitation in sight. And so I hit upon a unique plan of reverting to first principles in locomotion, creeping. I did fairly well at this, and in a few moments had reached the low encircling wall of the enclosure. There appeared to be no doors or windows upon the side nearest me, but as the wall was but about 4 feet high, I cautiously gained my feet and peered over the top upon the strangest sight it had ever been given me to see. The roof of the enclosure was a solid glass about 4 or 5 inches in thickness, and beneath this were several hundred large eggs, perfectly round and snowy white. The eggs were nearly uniform in size, being about 2½ feet in diameter. 5 or 6 had already hatched, and the grotesque caricatures which sat blinking in the sunlight were enough to cause me to doubt my sanity. They seemed mostly head with little scrawny bodies, long necks and 6 legs, or, as I afterward learned, 2 legs and 2 arms, with an intermediary pair of limbs which could be used at will either as arms or legs. Their eyes were set at the extreme sides of their heads, a trifle above the center, and protruded in such a manner that they could be directed either forward or back, and also independently of each other, thus permitting this queer animal to look in any direction, or in two directions at once, without the necessity of turning the head. The ears, which were slightly above the eyes and closer together, were small cup-shaped antennae, protruding not more than an inch on these young specimens. Their noses were but longitudinal slits in the center of their faces, midway between their mouths and ears. There was no hair on their bodies, which were of a very light yellowish-green color. In the adults, as I was to learn quite soon, this color deepens to an olive green and is darker in the male than in the female. Further, the heads of the adults are not so out of proportion to their bodies as is the case of the young. The iris of the eyes is blood red as in albinos, with the pupil, while the pupil is dark. The eyeball itself is very white, as are the teeth. These latter add a most ferocious appearance to an otherwise fearsome and terrible countenance, as the lower tusks curve upward to sharp points which end about where the eyes of earthly human beings are located. The whiteness of the teeth is not that of ivory, but of the snowiest and most gleaming of china. Against the dark background of their olive skins, their tusks stand out in a most striking manner, making these weapons present a singularly formidable appearance. Most of these details I noted later, for I was given but little time to speculate on the wonders of my new discovery. I had seen that the eggs were in the process of hatching, and as I stood watching the hideous little monsters break with their shells, I failed to note the approach of a score of full-grown Martians from behind me. Coming as they did over the soft and soundless moss, which covers practically the entire surface of Mars with the exception of the frozen areas at the poles and the scattered cultivated districts, they might have captured me easily. But their intentions were far more sinister. It was the rattling of the accoutrements of the foremost warrior which warned me. On such a little thing my life hung that I often marvel that I escaped so easily. Had not the rifle of the leader of the party swung from its fastenings beside his saddle in such a way as to strike against the butt of his great metal-shod spear, I should have snuffed out without even knowing that death was near me. But the little sound caused me to turn, and there upon me, not 10 feet from my breast, was the point of that huge a spear 40 feet long, tipped with gleaming metal, and held low at the side of a mounted replica of the little devils I had been watching. But how puny and harmless they now looked beside this huge and terrific incarnation of hate, of vengeance, and of death. The man himself, for such I may call him, was fully 15 feet in height, and on earth would have weighed some 400 pounds. He sat his mount as we sit a horse, grasping the animal's barrel with his lower limbs, while the hands of his 2 right arms held his immense spear low at the side of his mount. His 2 left arms were outstretched laterally to help preserve his balance. The thing he rode having neither bridle or reins of any description for guidance. And his mount. How can earthly words describe it? It towered 10 feet at the shoulder, had 4 legs on either side, a broad, flat tail, larger at the tip than at the root, and which it held straight out behind while running. A gaping mouth which split its head from its snout to its long, massive neck. Like its master, it was entirely devoid of hair, but was of dark slate color and exceedingly smooth and glossy. Its belly was white and its legs shaded from the slate of its shoulders and hips to a vivid yellow at its feet. The feet themselves were heavily padded and nailless, which fact had also contributed to the noiselessness of their approach, and in common with the multiplicity of legs is a characteristic feature of the fauna of Mars. The highest type of man and one other animal, the only mammal existing on Mars, alone have well-formed nails, and there are absolutely no hoofed animals in existence there. Behind this first charging demon trailed 19 others, similar in all respects, but, as I learned later, bearing individual characteristics peculiar to themselves, precisely as no two of us are identical, although we are all cast to a similar mold. This picture, or rather marginalized nightmare, which I have described at length, made but one terrible and swift impression on me as I turned to meet it. Unarmed and naked as I was, the first law of nature manifested itself in the only possible solution of my immediate problem, and that was to get out of the vicinity of the point of the charging spear. Consequently, I gave a very earthly and at the same time superhuman leap to reach the top of the Martian incubator, for such I had determined it must be. My effort was crowned with a success which appalled me no less than it seemed to surprise the Martian warriors, for it carried me fully 30 feet into the air and landed me 100 feet from my pursuers and on the opposite side of the enclosure. I lighted upon the soft moss easily and without mishap, and turning saw my enemies lined up along the further wall. Some were surveying me with expressions which I afterward discovered marked extreme astonishment, and the others were evidently satisfying themselves that I had not molested their young. They were conversing together in low tones and gesticulating and pointing toward me. Their discovery that I had not harmed the little Martians and that I was unarmed must have caused them to look upon me with less ferocity. But as I was to learn later, the thing which weighed most in my favor was my exhibition of hurdling. While the Martians are immense, their bones are very large, and they are muscled only in proportion to the gravitation which they must overcome. The result is that they are infinitely less agile and less powerful in proportion to their weight than an Earthman, and I doubt there were one of them suddenly to be transported to Earth he could lift his own weight from the ground. In fact, I am convinced that he could not do so. My feat, then, was as marvelous upon Mars as it would have been upon Earth, and from desiring to annihilate me, they suddenly looked upon me as a wonderful discovery to be captured and exhibited among their fellows. The respite from my unexpected agility had given me permitted me to formulate plans for the immediate future and to note more closely the appearance of the warriors, for I could not disassociate these people in my mind from those other warriors who only the day before had been pursuing me. I noted that each was armed with several other weapons in addition to the huge spear which I have described. The weapon which caused me to decide against an attempt at escape by flight was what was evidently a rifle of some description, and which I felt for some reason they were peculiarly efficient in handling. These rifles were of a white metal stocked with wood, which I learned later was a very light and intensely hard growth much prized on Mars, and entirely unknown to us denizens of Earth. The metal of the barrel is an alloy composed principally of aluminum and steel, which they have learned to temper to a hardness far exceeding that of steel with which we are familiar. The weight of these rifles is comparatively little, and with the small caliber explosive radium projectiles which they use and the great length of the barrel, they are deadly in the extreme, and at ranges which would be unthinkable on Earth. The theoretical effective radius of this rifle is 300 miles. But the best they can do in actual service when equipped with their wireless finders and sighters is but a trifle over 200 miles. This is quite far enough to imbue me with great respect for the Martian firearm, and some telepathic force which must have warned me against an attempt to escape in broad daylight from under the muzzles of 20 of these death-dealing machines. The Martians, after conversing for a short time, turned and rode away in the direction from which they had come, leaving one of their number alone by the enclosure. When they had covered perhaps 200 yards, they halted and turned their mounts toward us, sat watching the warrior by the enclosure. He was the one whose spear had so nearly transfixed me, and was evidently the leader of the band. As I had noted, they seemed to have moved to their present position at his direction. When his force had come to a halt, he dismounted, threw down his spear and small arms, and came around to the end of the incubator toward me, entirely unarmed and as naked as I, except for the ornaments strapped upon his head, limbs, and breast. When he was within about 50 feet of me, he unclasped an enormous metal armlet, and holding it toward me in the open palm of his hand, addressed me in a clear, resonant voice, but in a language, it is needless to say, I could not understand. He then stopped as though waiting for me to reply, pricked up his antenna-like ears, and cocking his strange-looking eyes still further toward me. As the silence became painful, I concluded to hazard a little conversation on my own part, as I had guessed that he was making overtures of peace. The throwing down of his weapons and the withdrawing of his troop before his advance toward me would have signified a peaceful mission anywhere on Earth. So why not, then, on Mars? Placing my hand over my heart, I bowed low to the Martian, and explained to him that while I did not understand his language, his actions spoke for the peace and friendship that at the present moment were most dear to my heart. Of course, I might have been a babbling brook for all the intelligence my speech carried to him, but he understood the action with which I immediately followed my words. Stretching my hand toward him, I advanced and took the armlet from his open palm, clasping it about my arm above the elbow, smiled at him, and stood waiting. His wide mouth spread into an answering smile, and locking one of his intermediary arms in mine, we turned and walked back toward his mount. At the same time, he motioned his followers to advance. They started toward us on a wild run, but were checked by a signal from him. Evidently, he feared that were I to be really frightened again, I might jump entirely out of the landscape. He exchanged a few words with his men, motioned to me that I would ride behind one of them, and then mounted his own animal. The fellow designated reached down 2 or 3 hands and lifted me up behind him on the glossy back of his mount, where I hung on as best I could by the belts and straps which held the Martian's weapons and ornaments. The entire cavalcade then turned and galloped away toward the range of hills in the distance. And that concludes Chapter 3 of The Princess of Mars. How are we doing on time?
15.
Half past.
What is it?
Half past.
It's 1/2 past. All right, this is where I look to see how long the chapter is. So I'm not sure I can make it all the way through the next chapter, but I am going to see what all has been happening in the chat. So, whoa, I can't actually read the chat. Do you need to escape, Kitten?
Yes.
Okay, Kitten is escaping.
Say goodnight, kitten.
Night.
Good night, Kitten. Oh, my foot is asleep. My foot and Kitten are asleep.
We're doing great. We're doing great.
All right. So, Gordon has taken over the computer. Let's see. There we go. I still swear the best story time ever was LeVar Burton reading Shut the Fuck Up and Go to Sleep on the Rooster Teeth Extra Life fundraiser. That would be pretty amazing. Oh, chat skipped around.
Sold. Well, they're talking.
People are talking about the Expanse.
All right,
I'll try
so
to
we'll.
contain myself.
Okay. So Keeper may be the first to drift out. I think she was.
Kitten. Not
Kitten.
Keeper.
Oh, good Lord.
Kitten was.
It had the same first letter.
Yes. And there's an E.
All right. You all need to curl up in a critter pile. I think we're too tired to do that.
Yeah.
So there is an excellent. This is Fred the Penguin. Fred the Penguin has gone through the washing machine many times because when I was a professor, when students came into my office, they would sometimes break down in tears because life is hard and physics is harder.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not exactly appropriate to reach out and hug a student, but you can hand them a giant stuffed penguin and then wash it.
He's very soft.
He is the perfect size.
Yeah. I'm just like.
So that is Fred. Fred is a penguin.
Emperor of Hugs.
Yes, Emperor of Hugs. I like that.
I like Fred.
So yes, Allie is Cthulhu.
Sans tentacles.
Yeah.
The
You-
tentacles are retracted. They only come down when I feel threatened.
Yeah, you always need to have an elder god in your company. Oh, I think we're catching up. Chapter 4 is slightly shorter than Chapter 3, so there should be time. All right, so do folks want me to continue reading?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to continue on. Chapter 4, A Prisoner. We'd gone perhaps 10 miles when the ground began to rise up very rapidly. We were, as I was later to learn, nearly the edge of one of Mars' long dead seas, in the bottom of which my encounter with the Martians had taken place. In a short time, we gained the foot of the mountains, and after traversing a narrow gorge, came to an open valley at the far extremity of which was a low tableland upon which I beheld an enormous city. Toward this we galloped, entering it by what appeared to be a ruined roadway leading out from the city, but only to the edge of the tableland, where it ended abruptly in a flight of broad steps. Upon closer observation, I saw as we passed them that the buildings were deserted, and while not greatly decayed, had the appearance of not having been tenanted for years, perhaps for ages. Toward the center of the city was a large plaza, and upon this and in the buildings immediately surrounding it were camped some 900 or 1000 creatures of the same breed as my captors. For such I now considered them, despite the suave manner in which I had been trapped. With the exceptions of their ornaments, all were naked. The women varied in appearance but little from the men, except that their tusks were much larger in proportion to their height, in some instances curving nearly to their higher set ears. Their bodies were smaller and lighter in color, and their fingers and toes bore the rudiments of nails, which were entirely lacking among the males. The adult females ranged in height from 10 to 12 feet. The children were lighter in color, even lighter than the women, and all looked precisely alike to me, except that some were taller than others, older, I presumed. I saw no signs of extreme age among them, nor is there any appreciable difference in their appearance from the age of maturity, about 40, until about the age of 1,000 years. They go voluntarily upon their last strange pilgrimage down the river ice, which leads no living Martian knows whither, and from whose bosom no Martian has ever returned, or would be allowed to live did he return after once embarking upon its cold, dark waters. Only about one Martian in 1,000 dies of sickness or disease, and possibly about 20 take the voluntary pilgrimage. The other 979 die violent deaths in duels, in hunting, in aviation, and in war. But perhaps by far the greatest death loss comes during the age of childhood, when vast numbers of the little Martians fall victims to the great white apes of Mars. The average life expectancy of a Martian after the age of maturity is about 300 years, but would be nearer the 1,000 mark were it not for the various means leading to violent death. Owing to the waning resources of the planet, it evidently became necessary to counteract the increasing longevity which their remarkable skill in therapeutics and surgery produced. And so human life has come to be considered but lightly on Mars, as is evidenced by their dangerous sports and the almost continual warfare between the various communities. There are other and natural causes tending toward a diminution of population, but nothing contributes so greatly to this end as the fact that no male or female Martian is ever voluntarily without a weapon of destruction. As we neared the plaza and my presence was discovered, we were immediately surrounded by hundreds of creatures who seemed anxious to pluck me from my seat behind my guard. A word from the leader of the party stilled this clamor, and we proceeded at a trot across the plaza to the entrance of as magnificent an edifice as mortal eyes has rested upon. The building was low, but covered an enormous area. It was constructed of gleaming white marble inlaid with gold and brilliant stones which sparkled and scintillated in the sunlight. The main entrance was some 100 feet in width and projected from the building proper to form a huge canopy upon the entrance hall. There was no stairway, but a gentle incline to the first floor of the building opened into an enormous chamber encircled by galleries. On the floor of this chamber, which was dotted with highly carved wooden desks and chairs, were assembled about 40 or 50 male Martians around the steps of a rostrum. On the platform proper squatted an enormous warrior heavily loaded with metal ornaments, gay-colored flowers, and beautifully wrought leather trappings ingeniously set with precious stones. From his shoulders depended a short cape of white fur lined with brilliant scarlet silk. What struck me as most remarkable about this assemblage and the hall in which they were congregated was the fact that the creatures were entirely out of proportion to the desks, chairs, and other furnishings, these being the size adapted to human beings such as I, whereas the great bulks of the Martians could scarcely have squeezed into the chairs, nor was there room beneath the desks for their long legs. Evidently, then, there were other denizens on Mars than the wild and grotesque creatures into whose hands I had fallen. But the evidence of extreme antiquity which showed all around me indicated that these buildings might have belonged to some long extinct and forgotten race in the dim antiquity of Mars. Our party had halted at the entrance to the building, and at a sign from the leader I had been lowered to the ground. Again, locking his arm in mine, we had proceeded into the audience chamber. There were few formalities observed in approaching the Martian chieftain. My captor merely strode up the rostrum, the other making way for him as he advanced. The chieftain rose to his feet and uttered the name of my escort, who, in turn, halted and repeated the name of the ruler, followed by his title. At the time, this ceremony and the words they uttered meant nothing to me. But later I came to know that this was the customary greeting between two green Martians. Had the men been strangers and therefore unable to exchange names, they would have silently exchanged ornaments, had their missions been peaceful. Otherwise, they would have exchanged shots, or have fought out their introduction with some other of their various weapons. My captor, whose name was Tars Tarkas, was virtually the vice chieftain of the community, and a man of great ability as a statesman and warrior. He evidently explained briefly the incidents connected with his expedition, including my capture, and when he had concluded, the chieftain addressed me at some length. I replied in our good old English tongue, merely to convince him that neither of us could understand the other. But I noticed that when I smiled slightly on concluding, he did likewise. This fact, and the similar occurrence during my first talk with Tars Tarkas, convinced me that we had at least something in common: the ability to smile. Therefore, to laugh, denoting a sense of humor. But I was to learn that the Martian smile is merely perfunctory, and that the Martian laugh is a thing to cause strong men to blanch in horror. The ideas of humor among the green men of Mars are widely at variance with our conceptions of incitements to merriment. The death agonies of a fellow being are, in these strange creatures, provocative of the wildest hilarity, while their chief form of commonest amusement is to inflict death on their prisoners of war in various ingenious and horrible ways. The assembled warriors and chieftains examined me closely, feeling my muscles and the texture of my skin. The principal chieftain then evidently signified a desire to see me perform, and motioning me to follow, he started with Tars Tarkas for the open plaza. Now, I had made no attempt to walk. This is my first signal failure, except while tightly grasping Tars Tarkas' arm. And so now I was skipping and flitting about among the desks and chairs like some monstrous grasshopper. After bruising myself severely, much to the amusement of the Martians, I again had recourse to creeping. But this did not suit them, and I was roughly jerked to my feet by a towering fellow who had laughed most heartily at my misfortunes. As he banged me down upon my feet, his face was bent close to mine, and I did the only thing a gentleman might do under the circumstances of brutality, boorishness, and lack of consideration for a stranger's rights. I swung my fist squarely to his jaw, and he went down like a felled ox. As he sunk to the floor, I wheeled round with my back toward the nearest desk, expecting to be overwhelmed by the vengeance of his fellows, but determined to give them as good a battle as the unequal odds would permit me before I gave up my life. My fears were groundless, however, as the other Martians, at first struck dumb with wonderment, finally broke into wild peals of laughter and applause. I did not recognize the applause as such, but later, when I had become acquainted with their customs, I learned that I had won what they seldom accord, a manifestation of approbation. The fellow whom I had struck lay where he had fallen, nor did any of his mates approach him. Tarkus advanced toward me, holding out one of his arms, and we thus proceeded to the plaza without further mishap. I did not, of course, know the reason for which we had come to the open, but I was not long in being enlightened. They first repeated the word sock a number of times, and then Tarkus made several jumps, repeating the same word before each leap, then turned to me and he said sock. I saw what they were after, and gathering myself together, I socked with such marvelous success that I cleared a good 150 feet. Nor did I this time lose my equilibrium, but landed squarely upon my feet without falling. I then returned by easy jumps of 25 or 30 feet to the little group of warriors. My exhibition had been witnessed by several hundred lesser Martians, and they immediately broke into demands for repetition, which the chieftain then ordered me to make, but I was both hungry and thirsty, and determined on the spot that my only method of salvation was to demand the consideration from these creatures which they evidently would not voluntarily accord. I therefore ignored the repeated commands to sock, and each time they were made, I motioned to my mouth and rubbed my stomach. Tarkus and the chief exchanged a few words, and the former, calling to a young female among the throng, gave her some instructions and motioned me to accompany her. I grasped her proffered arm, and together we crossed the plaza toward a large building on the far side. My fair companion was about 8 feet tall, having just arrived at maturity, but not yet to her full height. She was of a light orange-green color with a smooth, glossy hide. Her name, as I afterward learned, was Sola, and she belonged to the retinue of Tarkus. She conducted me to a spacious chamber in one of the buildings fronting on the plaza, and which, from the litter of silks and furs upon the floor, I took to be the sleeping quarter of several of the natives. The room was well lighted by a number of large windows and was beautifully decorated with mural paintings and mosaics. But upon all there seemed to rest that indefinable touch of the finger of antiquity, which convinced me that the architects and builders of these wondrous creations had nothing in common with the crude half-brutes which now occupied them. Sola motioned me to be seated upon a pile of silks near the center of the room, and turning, made a peculiar hissing sound, as though signaling to someone in an adjoining room. In response to her call, I obtained my first sight of a new Martian wonder. It waddled in on its 10 short legs and squatted down before the girl like an obedient puppy. The thing was about the size of a Shetland pony, but its head bore a slight resemblance to that of a frog, except that the jaws were equipped with 3 rows of long, sharp tusks. And that awkwardly concludes Chapter 4, which ends at a very strange point. So, hello, Jillian is awake. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's true, this is the very first great space opera. Those are great emotes. I love them. So for those joining late, we are working on reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, The Princess of Mars. This is a old story that came out one chapter at a time in periodicals. And we're going to be reading whatever we can get through tonight and tomorrow night. And for those who want to hear the entire story, I will be reading it on Star Strider starting Tuesday. But right now, we are here to celebrate the end of the first day of Hangout-a-Thon, Volume 2 of 2023. I'm realizing we have absolutely no way to end the stream from where we are sitting. But first, we do want to find out how much money has been raised. I think I have the capacity to check. So we are currently sitting at $2,083. It is not a palindrome, but it is so greatly appreciated. Yeah, and I have no clue how many bits have been brought in because I can't see that from this screen. So this weekend for 32 not contiguous hours, we're going to go sleep.
She's letting us sleep this year.
I am. I'm capable of personal growth. So we're spending 32 hours. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We have 4,774 bits. So we're going to be back in, it's midnight. We're going to be back in 10 hours. We're going to go rest, eat some food, not necessarily in that order, eat some more food, figure out how to potentially keep the dogs quieter tomorrow and debug a microphone. And
tall orders.
It is tall orders, but we're capable of great things.
Yes, we can do it.
We dare
can
mighty.
Debug the microphone.
It's true. It's true. We dare mighty things around here. It's what we do. So we will be back with guests, with all sorts of things. And we hope that you'll join us. And the most important thing you could do for me in the next 10 hours is to share out that this is going on whatever social media makes you happy and sparks joy.
Yes.
There's no need to go to the things that do not spark joy. Much of social media does not spark joy. Go where it sparks you joy.
And tell people about us, tell people about CosmoQuest.
Yeah.
And what we do, and that we need funding to do all these awesome things. Thank you. I think the biggest way we grow our audience is just it's word of mouth. So just if you love what we do, go tell people.
I'm loving all the hearts in chat. You're warming my heart. You have an ant carrying green hearts.
Excuse me. Oh my god, it's a little leaf cutter ant carrying a heart leaf.
That is amazing. Broken Symmetry, you must sub so many channels to have your fabulous collection of emotes.
That's so adorable. And I just realized that other one's like a heart, but like an anatomically correct heart in a heart shape.
Yeah. Which kind of looks like a ladybug.
It's really cute. I thought it looked like a butt.
Okay, we can tell that our brains are not the same.
There are two kinds of people.
The ladybug and the butt.
So it's like, that's a butt. No, it's a heart. Okay, I need to go to sleep.
All right. So.
And on that note,
I'm going to let you talk us out while I go close up the stream.
Why are you letting me do that?
Because I'd rather you do that than touch the stream.
Oh,
because
okay.
You're tired.
Okay. just burn. Okay, yeah, she's right. I shouldn't be touching the stream right now. God knows what would happen. But yes, thank you everyone who has just come and like hung out with us, and everyone who has given money, and thank you Pamela for making this a non-consecutive hangout-a-thon so I can sleep, and hopefully make fewer production mistakes tomorrow. So yes, thank you from me and from the rest of the crew that's here, and I don't think that they're feeling very talkative. So yes, we're all going to go get some sleep, and we look forward to seeing you again in the morning. So good night or good morning, everyone.
Sleep
Yeah,
well.
thank you.